Muweza was a young girl with a heart as pure as the morning sun, her presence as calming as the whispering breeze in her small, picturesque village. The villagers adored her for her gentle nature, always willing to help others. But her life was anything but kind. After her father's death, Muweza's world was turned upside down. Her stepmother, Niarai, a woman with a heart as cold as the village's deepest well, took control of the household. What should have been a haven became a prison for Muweza. Every morning, Muweza woke before the roosters crow, working tirelessly to clean, cook, and fetch water, all while her stepsisters, Mbalisi and Shani, mocked her relentlessly. Niarai's cruelty went beyond words. She made Muweza invisible, forbidding her from attending village gatherings or making friends. Yet Muweza endured it all with quiet grace, her spirit unbroken despite the suffocating walls closing in on her. In the heart of the village stood the grand palace, its golden spires reaching toward the heavens. The kingdom buzzed with excitement as word spread of a royal ball. Prince Kivuli, the heir to the throne, had announced that he was searching for a bride. Whispers of his charm and wisdom filled the air. It was said that the prince was unlike any other, valuing intelligence and character over riches and appearances. The villagers speculated endlessly about the ball. Mothers prepared their daughters with elaborate dresses and rehearsed manners, each hoping to catch the prince's eye. The announcement reached Niarai's ears, and her ambition ignited like dry grass in a summer fire. She dreamed of her daughters, Mbalisi and Shani, marrying into royalty. But her dreams were shadowed by one glaring obstacle, Muweza's undeniable beauty. Niarai's envy festered like an open wound. Muweza's natural elegance and kindness, even in rags, made her a threat to Niarai's plans. As the royal ball approached, Niarai's resentment grew. She vowed to ensure that Muweza would never step foot inside the palace. She would not allow her stepdaughter to overshadow her own children. Muweza, unaware of the grand event, continued her daily chores. Her dreams were simple, rooted in peace and love, far removed from the glamour of the palace. But fate had other plans for her. While the rest of the village prepared for the ball with excitement, Muweza found herself unknowingly at the center of a story that would soon change her life forever. Prince Kivuli, too, had his share of burdens. Though surrounded by luxury, he longed for something more, a partner who could see beyond the crown and understand the man he was. The ball was not just a formality for him, but a chance to find someone who could connect with him on a deeper level. Little did he know that the girl he was searching for was living a life of hardship just beyond the palace gates. The village, the palace, and the people were all pieces of a puzzle that destiny was about to arrange. Muweza's life of quiet suffering was about to intersect with the world of royalty, and neither would be the same again. Niarai's hatred for Muweza was as dark and twisted as the thick, oppressive clouds that loomed over the village during a storm. She had never forgiven her late husband for choosing Muweza's mother over her own. It was a decision that had haunted Niarai for years, but it wasn't just the old memories that made her bitter. It was the girl herself. Muweza's grace, her warmth, and her beauty seemed like an insult to everything Niarai had worked for. Her own daughters, Mbalisi and Shani, were beautiful too, but they lacked the quiet elegance that Muweza carried effortlessly, even in the dirtiest of rags. When news of the royal ball reached the village, Niarai's jealousy morphed into something darker, something obsessive. She knew that if Muweza were allowed to attend, she would undoubtedly catch the eye of Prince Kivuli. The prince's wisdom and reputation as a kind and just ruler were well known, and he was rumoured to seek a partner who was not just beautiful but virtuous and humble, qualities that Muweza embodied in abundance. Niarai could not bear the thought of her stepdaughter stealing the spotlight from her precious daughters. As Niarai's mind churned with malicious thoughts, a twisted plan began to form. She would ensure that Muweza would never set foot inside the royal palace. It would not be enough for her to keep her stepdaughter from the ball. No, Niarai's jealousy burned too hot for that. She wanted to see Muweza broken, humiliated, and rendered utterly powerless. The first step of her plan was simple. She would create a series of impossible tasks that would keep Muweza occupied and prevent her from attending the ball. Nyarai knew that Muweza was hard-working, always willing to help others, always sacrificing her own desires for the good of the family. This made her the perfect victim. One morning, as the sun rose high over the village, Nyarai called Muweza into the kitchen with a cruel smile on her lips. "There's a grand ball coming, and you think you'll be able to attend," she sneered, looking Muweza up and down with contempt. "I have a task for you, something far more important than your silly dreams of dancing with royalty." Muweza looked up from her work, startled by the venom in her stepmother's voice. She had no idea what Nyarai was plotting. Nyarai's eyes gleamed with malice as she spoke. "There is a well deep in the forest, hidden beneath the oldest tree. It is said to be cursed, but it is the only place where the water needed to purify our home can be found. I want you to bring back enough water to fill this entire jar. Do not return until you have it." Muweza's heart sank. She knew the forest was dangerous, and many people had returned with eerie stories of strange creatures and magical beings. But her gentle heart could not refuse. She nodded, albeit with hesitation. Nyarai's grin widened. "Don't waste time asking questions. Go now, and while you're at it, I want the house to be spotless by the time you return. If the chores aren't finished, you'll never see the inside of that ball. Do you understand?" Muweza nodded again, though her heart felt heavy with the burden of the tasks. Her body was already exhausted from the usual chores, but she had no choice. She set out for the forest, the weight of her stepmother's cruel demands hanging over her like a storm cloud. The forest was an endless expanse of towering trees, their branches twisting into dark shapes, blocking out the sunlight. The air felt thick with mystery and danger, and Muweza couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she ventured deeper, her legs grew sore and the path became treacherous. She tripped over gnarled roots, her hands scraped against thorny bushes, but she pushed forward, determined to complete the impossible task that Nyarai had set for her. Hours passed, and Muweza felt herself growing weaker. The weight of the jar, now full of the cursed water, seemed to grow heavier with every step she took. She stumbled through the woods, half exhausted, desperate to return home and finish the impossible tasks. The thought of her stepmother's cruel gaze, the way she would look at Muweza if the work was not completed, kept her going. But with every step, doubt crept in. Could she really do this? When Muweza finally returned, her body trembling with exhaustion, Nyarai was waiting for her, a wicked gleam in her eyes. The jar of cursed water was nearly too heavy for Muweza to hold, her hands shaking as she handed it to her stepmother. Nyarai examined the water with satisfaction before handing it back to Muweza. "Now there's one more thing," she said coolly. "You still have one final task before you can even think about attending that ball. I want you to clean every inch of this house, inside and out, by sunset. Do not disappoint me." Muweza's heart sank as she looked around the house. She had barely enough strength to stand, but the thought of failure was worse than any physical pain she could endure. Nyarai's eyes were cold, unblinking, and Muweza knew she had no choice but to obey. As the day wore on, Muweza worked tirelessly, scrubbing every surface, washing every dish, and sweeping every corner of the house. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ground, and Muweza could feel her energy draining, her body breaking under the weight of the impossible tasks. But no matter how much she tried, the house seemed never to be clean enough. Every time she thought she had finished, Nyarai found something else to criticize. When the night finally came, Muweza was on the verge of collapse. The house was still far from spotless, and Nyarai's cruel eyes had been following her every move. But Muweza had no strength left to argue. She had failed. Nyarai, sensing her triumph, locked Muweza in the storage shed, a place used to keep tools and supplies away from prying eyes. She was left alone in the dark, cold shed, her heart breaking with the realization that she would never make it to the ball. Her stepmother had won. The shed was a cage, and Muweza was its prisoner. She felt utterly hopeless, trapped in a life of servitude with no way out. Tears ran down her face as she slumped against the wall. In that moment, she could not see any light in her future, only the cruel darkness of her stepmother's hatred. Muweza had never felt so alone. The cold air in the shed bit at her skin, and her spirit felt as if it had withered into nothingness. She had been locked away, her dreams of attending the royal ball crushed by Nyarai's cruelty. But just as she was about to give in to despair, a soft knock echoed from the far corner of the shed. At first, Muweza thought it was her mind playing tricks on her. After all, the loneliness had begun to cloud her thoughts. But then she heard it again, clearer this time, like the gentle tap of a faraway branch brushing against the window. The door creaked open, revealing an old woman, bent and weathered by time. Her skin was dark as night, yet it shimmered with a faint iridescence, as if she were part of the very earth itself. Her eyes were the colour of the deep, endless forest, filled with an ancient wisdom that made Muweza pause for a moment. The woman wore a robe of flowing emerald green, and her silver hair, braided in intricate knots, seemed to shimmer with an ethereal glow. "Are you Muweza, the kind-hearted girl who has been wronged?" the woman asked, her voice soft, yet strong, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. Muweza nodded, unsure of what to make of the mysterious visitor. Her heart, broken and bruised, flared with a flicker of hope at the sight of the woman. The old woman smiled kindly, her eyes twinkling as if she had known Muweza's story all along. "I am Savanna," she said, her voice like music. "I have seen your suffering and I have come to offer you help. You need not endure this cruelty any longer, dear child." Muweza blinked in confusion. "How can you help me? What power do you have?" Savanna's smile deepened as she stepped forward, her hands holding a small vial of glowing liquid. "I am a healer, a keeper of the ancient ways, and I possess knowledge of things most people cannot fathom. I can help you change your fate, but you must trust in me and in the magic of the forest." The mention of magic made Muweza's heart skip a beat. Could this woman truly help her? Or was she just another trick, a fleeting illusion in the face of her hopelessness? Savanna seemed to read her thoughts. "Fear not, child. Magic is not as complicated as it seems. It is simply a matter of balance, of kindness and wisdom intertwining with the will of the universe." Muweza felt a deep sense of longing in her chest, a yearning for something, anything that could break her chains. "What must I do?" Savanna's eyes softened. "You must journey to the heart of the enchanted forest, where the magical well lies. It holds the power to transform, to heal, and to give you the strength you need to take control of your life." Muweza's heart fluttered. The forest was known to be treacherous, filled with creatures of legend and spirits that whispered to the lost travelers who dared to enter. But something in Savanna's presence felt safe. It was as if the very air around her carried a promise of hope. "You will not be alone," Savanna continued. "The creatures of the forest will guide you, and your kindness will be your greatest strength. Trust in yourself, and you will succeed." With that, Savanna handed Muweza the vial of glowing liquid. "Drink this when you reach the well. It will give you the clarity you need." Muweza, though still unsure, nodded gratefully. She stood, her legs trembling from the exertion of the past days, and followed Savanna out of the shed and into the night. The air was cool, but something felt different now, almost magical. The path to the forest seemed less daunting with Savanna by her side. As they approached the edge of the forest, the trees parted as if welcoming them. Muweza hesitated, staring into the dark expanse ahead. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were alive. She had heard the stories. The forest was full of hidden dangers, magical beings that would mislead you, and whispers that could drive one to madness. Savanna turned to her with a reassuring smile. The forest only shows what you bring into it, child. If you come with kindness, you will be met with kindness. Taking a deep breath, Muweza stepped into the forest, and the world seemed to shift around her. The air grew richer with the scent of earth and flowers, and the moonlight filtered through the trees, casting a silver glow upon the ground. The further they ventured, the more Muweza felt a sense of wonder. This was no ordinary forest. This was a living, breathing place of magic. As they walked, Muweza noticed creatures watching them from the shadows. Small, luminous beings with wings like butterflies, their eyes glinting with curiosity. At first, they stayed at a distance, but as Muweza whispered kind words of greeting, they drew closer. A small fox, its fur the color of autumn leaves, darted across their path, stopping to look at Muweza with intelligent eyes. She smiled softly, her heart lifting at the sight. "Do you see?" Savanna said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "The forest is full of life, and it responds to your heart." Muweza nodded, feeling an undeniable connection to this magical place. As they ventured deeper into the forest, she encountered more wondrous creatures. Will-o'-the-wisps floating just above the ground, glowing mushrooms that lit their path, and even a deer with antlers made of gold. Every creature, every whisper of wind, seemed to guide her forward, as if the forest itself were cheering her on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the heart of the forest, a clearing surrounded by ancient trees whose trunks were thick with moss. At the center of the clearing was the magical well, its water glistening with an otherworldly glow. The air around it shimmered, and Muweza could feel the pull of its power. "This is it," Savanna said softly. "Drink the potion, and the magic will awaken within you." Muweza, her hands trembling, uncorked the vial and drank the glowing liquid. Almost instantly, she felt a warmth spread through her, filling her with strength and clarity. The world around her seemed to pulse with energy. Her senses heightened, and she felt as if she could hear the heartbeat of the forest itself. Her skin tingled, and she felt a surge of confidence that had been absent for so long. The magic of the forest was now inside her, and with it came a transformation. Her ragged clothes shimmered, as if woven from the very stars themselves, and her hair glowed with a silken sheen. The exhaustion that had once weighed her down was replaced by a newfound vitality, and Muweza's eyes sparkled with a sense of purpose. Savanna smiled warmly at her. "Now, child, you are ready. You are no longer a prisoner of your past. The power to shape your future lies within you." Muweza looked at her reflection in the well's water, and for the first time in years, she saw the girl she had always dreamed of becoming. A girl who was strong, beautiful, and deserving of her place in the world. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it was not one of sadness. It was a tear of hope, a tear that marked the beginning of her journey toward the future she had always deserved. The palace loomed ahead, its grandiose silhouette cutting through the night sky like a fortress of light. Its golden spires reflected the moon's gentle glow, shimmering as if it were made of pure stardust. Muweza stood at the foot of the marble stairs, her heart racing as she gazed at the lavish estate before her. This moment had seemed so far out of reach, a dream that felt almost too fantastical to grasp. But now, standing in her magical gown, the realization hit her with full force. She was here. The entire ball was a spectacle of opulence. The guests, adorned in rich silks and sparkling jewels, glided gracefully across the grand ballroom. The air was thick with the sounds of clinking glasses, the rustle of gowns, and the soft strains of a string quartet that played from the high balcony. The vast chandelier above, its crystals refracting the light into 1,000 colors, seemed to pulse in time with the music. It was a night for celebration, for new beginnings, but for Muweza, it felt like the beginning of her own transformation, a moment when she could finally escape from the suffocating life her stepmother had planned for her. As Muweza stepped into the ballroom, the noise seemed to die down for a moment. All eyes turned toward her, but unlike the other guests, her presence was different. Where the ladies wore layers of intricate lace and pearls, Muweza's gown seemed to shimmer with an ethereal light, its fabric like liquid gold as it cascaded around her. Her hair, once a tangled mass of unkempt curls, now flowed like dark silk down her back, glowing with an almost supernatural luster. Her beauty was striking, not in the usual way, but in a way that caught the eye and held it, not because of extravagance, but because of something deeper, something real. Prince Kivuli stood near the edge of the room, chatting with dignitaries and watching his guests with a calculating gaze. But as Muweza entered, his attention shifted immediately. His eyes locked onto her, as if drawn by an invisible force, and for a moment the crowd seemed to fade into the background. There was something about her that captivated him, a quiet grace, a confidence that was not born from wealth or status, but from something more genuine. Muweza hesitated for a brief moment before gathering the strength to walk forward, her steps light and graceful as she made her way deeper into the ballroom. She passed through the crowd, her heart thudding in her chest, her gaze avoiding the leering eyes of the other women, especially her stepsisters, who were glaring at her from across the room. The disdain in their eyes was palpable, but Muweza didn't let it shake her. This night was hers, not theirs. As she neared the center of the ballroom, she felt a shift in the air. Prince Kivuli was no longer content to simply watch from afar. He approached her with a confident stride, his tall figure cutting through the crowd like a man who was used to getting what he wanted. But there was something different in his approach this time. There was an uncertainty in his step, an unspoken question that seemed to hang in the air between them. "Good evening, my lady," he said, his voice smooth and rich, carrying an undertone of warmth. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of your company." Muweza turned toward him, surprised but not overwhelmed. She curtsied, her movements fluid and graceful. "Your Highness," she responded, her voice steady but soft. "I am honored to be here tonight." For a brief moment, they simply stood there, observing one another. Prince Kivuli's piercing gaze never wavered from Muweza's eyes, as though he was trying to read her, to understand what lay beneath the surface. Muweza, in turn, held his gaze with quiet intensity, her own thoughts swirling. She could feel the weight of the moment, the way their connection seemed to spark between them, like a thread pulling them closer with every passing second. "You seem different from the others," Kivuli said, his words thoughtful. "There is something about you that stands apart." Muweza smiled gently, though her heart fluttered at his words. "I suppose I am," she replied, her voice laced with a quiet mystery. "Not everyone here has the same ambitions, Your Highness." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Ambitions?" "Ambitions to impress, to be seen," she explained, her words deliberate, though she felt a flicker of vulnerability beneath the surface. "I think there is more to a person than the way they look or the titles they hold." Prince Kivuli seemed to consider her words for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. He was used to people attempting to gain his favor, to impress him with their wealth and beauty. But Muweza was different. There was an honesty in her voice, an authenticity that was rare in his world. He could not quite place it, but it made him want to know more. "I agree," he said finally, his voice softening. "There is something real about you. Tell me, what brings you to the ball tonight?" Muweza paused, her thoughts drifting for a moment. She had no grand story, no pretension, no false airs to offer him. She had come to the ball because she had no other choice, because fate had thrust her into this moment. But she couldn't tell him that. Instead, she simply smiled again, a little more shyly this time. "I came because I wanted to see the world beyond my own," she said quietly. "Because I wanted to know what it feels like to dream." Her words seemed to resonate with him. The prince's eyes softened, and for a brief instant, the glamour of the ballroom faded. There was just the two of them, No title, no expectations, just an unspoken connection that hung heavy in the air. Before either of them could speak further, the music shifted, signaling the start of the dance. The prince offered his hand, his expression both determined and tentative. "Would you do me the honor of dancing, Muweza?" he asked, his voice low. Muweza hesitated for just a moment, her heart fluttering in her chest. But then she placed her hand in his, her breath steadying as their fingers intertwined. The world around them seemed to fall away as they stepped onto the floor, moving in rhythm with the music. The ballroom, the guests, everything else faded into a blur as Muweza and Kivuli moved together, lost in the dance. The prince led her effortlessly, his every movement fluid and graceful. Muweza, though not accustomed to the intricacies of such dances, followed with a natural ease, swept up in the moment. There was no pressure, no expectation, only the music and the connection that seemed to deepen with every step. But as the night wore on, a sense of urgency began to pulse within Muweza. She glanced at the clock, her heart sinking as she realized that the midnight hour was drawing near. The magic that had transformed her was bound by time. She had to leave before the clock struck 12, or everything would return to its previous state. Her mind raced. She had to go. But the thought of leaving the prince, of disappearing from this world she had never known, made her heart ache. Still, she knew she had no choice. As the final notes of the dance played, she pulled away gently, offering a faint smile. "Your Highness, I must take my leave." Kivuli looked at her in surprise, his expression darkening with concern. "Why so soon?" "The night is young, and I have enjoyed our conversation." Thank you, Your Highness." "I must go," Muweza said quickly, her voice filled with urgency. Before he could protest further, Muweza turned and fled into the shadows of the palace, her heart racing. She knew time was running out. As she raced down the long hallways, her feet barely touching the ground, she stumbled at the final turn. Her foot caught on a step, and she glanced down to see one of her sandals slip off. Muweza gasped but didn't stop. She couldn't. Her future depended on it. With a final glance behind her, she disappeared into the night, leaving the palace, leaving the prince, and leaving behind a single magical sandal. The morning after Muweza's swift departure from the royal ball, the entire kingdom buzzed with excitement. Word of the mysterious woman who had captivated Prince Kivuli's heart spread like wildfire. Her beauty, her grace, her humble yet striking presence, everyone was talking about her. The prince himself could not stop thinking about the woman who had danced with him as though they shared a secret, something deeper than just the fleeting connection of a royal event. At the Grand Palace, Prince Kivuli stood before his people, his face set with determination. The room fell silent as he addressed the kingdom, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "I, Prince Kivuli of Kivani, hereby announce that the woman I danced with last night, the one who left behind a single sandal, is the one I seek to marry," he declared, his words echoing through the crowded hall. "This woman is unlike any I have ever known. Her heart, her kindness, and her spirit have captured mine. I will not rest until I find her." A wave of murmurs swept through the gathered nobles, citizens, and courtiers. Whispers filled the air as people speculated about the identity of this mysterious lady. Some said she must be a noblewoman in disguise. Others guessed she was an entertainer, a commoner with extraordinary charm. But the prince, resolute in his search, remained silent about her identity, determined to let the magic of the moment lead him to her. "I will search every village, every house, every family," Kivuli continued, his eyes alight with purpose. "The woman whose foot fits this sandal is the one I will marry, and I will not settle for anyone else." The kingdom erupted in excitement, the news spreading quickly. The announcement became the talk of every street, every corner of the realm. There was a sense of anticipation in the air. Who could this woman be? The whole kingdom waited in suspense. As the days passed, the prince's search began in earnest. His royal carriage, flanked by his guards, rumbled through the cobblestone streets, drawing crowds of curious onlookers. He visited village after village, knocking on door after door, asking each household if the mysterious woman was there. It was not just a search for love, it had become a quest, a mission to find the woman who had somehow claimed his heart. The prince's arrival in Muweza's village sent a tremor of fear through the hearts of the villagers. They had heard the rumors, but no one had expected the search to come so close. News spread quickly that the prince himself was on his way, and the entire village prepared for his visit. The streets were lined with the curious, eager to see what would unfold, while inside the homes, the tension was palpable. At Muweza's home, Nyarai's hands shook with anxiety as she paced the floor. She had heard of the prince's decree and knew exactly what was at stake. The prince was looking for a woman who could fit the sandal, and if Muweza's identity was revealed, everything she had planned would fall apart. Her own daughters, Basa and Salwa, would never stand a chance if the mysterious woman from the ball came forward. "Hide her!" Nyarai hissed to her daughters as they cowered in the corner of the room. "Keep her out of sight. We cannot let anyone see her, and when the prince asks for the sandal, make sure one of you fits it." Basa, her eyes wide with worry, nodded in agreement. "But mother, what if the prince recognizes her? She's the one he danced with, isn't she?" Nyarai silenced her with a sharp look. "We'll take care of it. Don't worry about that." With great haste, Nyarai instructed her daughters to lock Muweza in the small storage room at the back of the house. Her heart was heavy with guilt, but she pushed it aside, focusing solely on her ambition to marry one of her daughters into the royal family. The prince arrived with his entourage, and the village fell silent as he dismounted his horse, his eyes scanning the crowd. His gaze was intense, searching for any sign of the woman who had stolen his heart. He walked with purpose, stopping at each house, each doorstep, asking if anyone had seen the woman whose foot might fit the enchanted sandal. When the prince arrived at Muweza's house, Nyarai was ready, her expression cold and calculating as she stepped forward to greet him. "Your Highness," she said with a deep curtsy, her voice sweet yet strained. "I am honored by your visit. Please, come in." The prince nodded curtly and followed her into the home, his eyes flicking briefly toward the small shed in the back where Muweza was being kept hidden. He felt a strange pull, as if the woman he sought was near, but he couldn't place it. Still, he remained focused on his task. Without wasting time, the prince sat down and unwrapped the precious sandal. It gleamed in the sunlight, its delicate craftsmanship evident in every curve and fold. With a solemn nod, he handed it to Nyarai. "The lady who danced with me last night will be the one to fit this sandal," he declared. "If any of your daughters are the one, I will take them as my bride." Nyarai smiled wickedly to herself as she brought her daughters forward, her voice full of false sweetness. "My daughters will be more than happy to try on the sandal, Your Highness. They are both of good standing, and I am certain one of them will fit." The prince observed the girls closely, his eyes flicking between them, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Basa was the first to try the sandal, but it was clear immediately that it was too small. She winced as she attempted to squeeze her foot into it, but it was no use. Salwa was next, her foot also too large to fit. The tension grew as Nyarai's hope began to wane. Then, just as the prince was about to leave, he heard a familiar voice, a soft, quiet voice that seemed to carry the weight of the night air. "Muweza!" came the call. "It is time!" Muweza emerged from the shed, her heart pounding as she walked toward the prince. She had never felt so exposed, yet there was a sense of calmness that washed over her. When she stepped forward, the prince's eyes widened in recognition. He had known it all along. There was something about her, something that made her stand apart. Without hesitation, Muweza sat before the prince and extended her foot, the same one that had danced with him under the chandeliers. With a gentle smile, the prince placed the sandal on her foot. It fit perfectly. The room fell silent as the truth was revealed. The sandal had found its match. Prince Kivuli's eyes lit up with joy and relief, the search finally over. He stood up, his heart swelling with emotion as he took Muweza's hand in his. "It's you," he whispered, almost breathless. "It's really you." The crowd erupted into applause, the tension and uncertainty dissolving in an instant. Muweza's heart fluttered as she looked up into the prince's eyes, her smile one of both surprise and happiness. She had been found, not because of the sandal, but because of the connection they had shared, a connection that could never be denied. And so, the kingdom rejoiced. The prince had found his true love, and Muweza had finally stepped into the life she had always dreamed of. The revelation was both a triumph and a promise that love, in its truest form, could never be hidden for long. Nyarai and her daughters stood before the royal court, their faces pale with fear. The prince's voice was steady but firm as he addressed them, his gaze unwavering. "Your cruelty has not gone unnoticed," Kaivuli declared, his words echoing through the grand hall. "You sought to ruin the life of a kind-hearted woman for your own gain. Justice will be served." With a solemn nod, he ordered the family's lands and privileges to be revoked, leaving them with only what they had rightfully earned. Nyarai, once filled with arrogance and malice, now stood humbled before the consequences of her actions. Muweza, however, was a picture of joy and serenity. By the prince's side, she found a life filled with love, respect, and peace. Their union blossomed not just because of her beauty, but because of the kindness that radiated from her heart. Together, they ruled with compassion, ensuring that their people were treated fairly and with love. Muweza's story became one of inspiration, a tale whispered from generation to generation. Her kindness, her strength, and her ability to forgive brought light to those around her, proving that love and goodness will always triumph over darkness. And so, the kingdom flourished, with Muweza and Kivuli as its beloved rulers, their hearts forever intertwined.